What happens when the world's most powerful economy slams the door on some of Asia's most vulnerable nations? In 2025, that question isn't hypothetical, it's happening right now. With a new wave of sanctions targeting trade, tech, finance, and military cooperation, the US has just triggered a seismic shift. And for 10 Asian countries already battling debt, inflation, and political unrest, this could be the breaking point. For some governments, it means canceled projects. For citizens, it means vanishing jobs, currency crashes, and food prices soaring overnight. From Southeast Asia to the Middle East, the fallout is accelerating. We're counting down the 10 Asian countries now teetering on the edge of economic collapse and how as sanctions are pushing them closer to the brink. Number 10. Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was already walking an economic tightrope. But after the US imposed new restrictions on financial transactions tied to Chinese-funded infrastructure projects in early 2025, the island nation's debt crisis deepened fast. Washington accuses Sri Lanka of becoming a strategic satellite of Beijing, and now it's paying the price. In March 2025, the US Treasury blacklisted several state-owned firms involved in port and rail projects. That spooked international lenders, froze pending investments, and triggered a 13% drop in the Sri Lankan rupee within weeks. Even worse, Washington's move complicated Sri Lanka's delicate negotiations with Japan over a $2.5 billion debt restructuring deal. According to Reuters, Sri Lanka has no room for policy error as inflation continues to hover above 20% and food insecurity grows. The IMF has warned that any further instability could jeopardize the entire reform roadmap. And with rising fuel prices and mass protests once again in the streets of Colombo, the danger of another full-blown collapse feels all too real. Number 9. Pakistan. Pakistan is facing a perfect storm of economic, political, and security crises, pushing the country dangerously close to collapse. Soaring inflation, a crashing currency, and an overwhelming debt burden have left millions struggling to survive. The economy has been hit hard by fuel shortages and massive import restrictions, causing essential goods to skyrocket in price. In early 2025, the Pakistani rupee hit an all-time low, making it even more difficult to repay its $125 billion foreign debt. With reserves running dangerously low, many fear the country is on the brink of total financial meltdown. Political instability is only making things worse. After years of corruption scandals, military interference, and violent protests, the government is barely holding on to power. Meanwhile, terrorist organizations continue to pose a growing threat, further destabilizing the region. Pakistan's infrastructure is also failing. Power outages, water shortages, and collapsing public services have turned daily life into a nightmare for millions. With more than 40% of the population living below the poverty line, the situation is becoming more desperate by the day. Despite loans from the International Monetary Fund (IMF), many analysts believe Pakistan is simply buying time before an inevitable collapse. Unless drastic changes are made, the future looks bleak. Number 8. Myanmar. Myanmar has been in a downward spiral ever since the military coup in 2021, and things have only gone from bad to worse. The country is trapped in a brutal civil war, with resistance forces battling the military government on multiple fronts. The economy is in freefall. Sanctions from Western nations, foreign businesses pulling out, and a collapsing currency have left Myanmar's economy in shambles. Inflation is soaring, and citizens are struggling to afford even the most basic goods. International organizations warn that millions are at risk of starvation, with food prices surging beyond what the average citizen can afford. Banks are failing, foreign investors are fleeing, and black markets are thriving as people desperately try to survive. The political crisis shows no signs of resolution. The military government remains firmly in control, while rebel groups continue to gain ground in the countryside. Experts warn that a full-scale collapse is becoming more likely as the government loses control over more territory. With no end to the conflict in sight, Myanmar is on the edge of disaster, and the entire country could soon descend into total anarchy. Number 7. North Korea. North Korea has always been isolated from the rest of the world, but in 2025, it's closer than ever to total collapse. The country is struggling with extreme poverty, food shortages, and crippling economic sanctions that have left millions of citizens desperate. The biggest problem? A massive food crisis. According to UN reports, more than 40% of the population is malnourished, and food shortages have reached their worst levels since the 1990s famine. With borders still tightly controlled, foreign aid is nearly impossible to access. Meanwhile, the economy is barely functional. Government spending is focused almost entirely on the military and nuclear weapons program, while ordinary citizens struggle to survive. The black market has become the only way for many North Koreans to access food and basic supplies. Political stability is also becoming more fragile. While Kim Jong-un maintains an iron grip on power, internal cracks within the regime are starting to show. Reports of increased defections, military purges, and elite dissatisfaction suggest that things could unravel fast. North Korea has managed to survive against the odds for decades, but with its economy in ruins and its people starving, even the most tightly controlled dictatorship has its breaking point. Number 6. Laos. Laos may not make global headlines often, but beneath the surface, it's facing a crippling economic crisis that could push it toward collapse. Once seen as a rising tourism hub in Southeast Asia, the country is now drowning in debt, inflation, and financial mismanagement. The biggest issue: debt to China. Laos owes over $14 billion to Beijing, much of it from loans tied to large infrastructure projects like the China-Laos high-speed railway. With limited revenue and a struggling economy, the country is finding it nearly impossible to keep up with payments. Inflation is spiraling out of control. Prices for food, fuel, and everyday goods have surged by over 35% in just the past year, and the local currency, the Laotian kip, has lost more than 50% of its value since 2022. With salaries stagnant and jobs scarce, ordinary citizens are being pushed deeper into poverty. The collapse of tourism has only worsened the situation. While Laos once relied heavily on international visitors, post-pandemic recovery has been slow, and many businesses have permanently closed. Without strong industries to replace this lost revenue, the economy is running on fumes. If Laos doesn't secure financial relief soon, experts warn that a full-scale economic meltdown is inevitable. The country is already dependent on foreign aid, and without a plan to reduce debt and restore stability, its future looks extremely fragile. Number 5. Afghanistan. Afghanistan has been in crisis mode for decades, but in 2025, the situation has gone from bad to worse. Under Taliban rule, the country has become an economic disaster zone, with starvation, poverty, and a lack of international support pushing millions toward the brink. Since the Taliban took over in 2021, foreign aid, once the backbone of Afghanistan's economy, has all but disappeared. With over 90% of the population living below the poverty line, millions are struggling just to afford food and clean water. Sanctions and international isolation have further crippled the financial system. The banking sector has collapsed, and inflation has made even the most basic goods unaffordable for ordinary Afghans. Desperation has led to a rise in black market trade, child labor, and even organ trafficking. Security remains a massive concern. Armed resistance groups, including ISIS-K, continue to launch attacks, leading to a growing insurgency against the Taliban. Meanwhile, public executions and extreme laws have driven many Afghans to flee the country in search of safety. With no formal economy, no international trade, and widespread starvation, Afghanistan is closer to collapse than ever before. Experts predict that if the Taliban cannot secure foreign funding soon, the entire country could descend into complete anarchy. Number 4. Bangladesh. Bangladesh was once considered a rising economic power in South Asia, but in 2025, it's facing one of its worst financial crises in decades. Soaring inflation, a collapsing currency, and political unrest have made survival increasingly difficult for millions of citizens. Inflation is at an all-time high, with food prices jumping by over 40% in just 1 year. Essentials like rice, cooking oil, and fuel have become luxuries for many, and reports indicate that hunger is rising at an alarming rate. The country's debt crisis is also spiraling out of control. Bangladesh owes billions to international lenders and is struggling to pay back loans, especially as foreign reserves are running dangerously low. If the government fails to secure more aid, a financial collapse could happen within months. Adding to the chaos is political instability. Protests and violent clashes between government forces and opposition groups have become more frequent, leading to fears of a potential civil uprising. Many fear another military coup if the situation doesn't improve soon. While Bangladesh's garment industry still brings in revenue, it may not be enough to save the economy. if inflation keeps rising and political tensions explode. Bangladesh could face one of the worst collapses in South Asian history. Number 3. Lebanon. Lebanon is already a failed state, and in 2025, the situation has only gotten worse. The country is in economic ruin, with hyperinflation, power shortages, and total government dysfunction making daily life unbearable. The Lebanese pound has lost over 95% of its value since 2019, making it nearly worthless. Banks have frozen citizens' savings, forcing people to withdraw their own money at massive losses. Many Lebanese are now relying on remittances from relatives abroad just to survive. Basic services have collapsed. Electricity is available for only a few hours a day, hospitals are running out of medicine, and the water supply is becoming increasingly contaminated. The cost of basic goods has quadrupled, leaving millions struggling to afford food. Meanwhile, political corruption remains rampant. The government is practically non-functional, unable to implement reforms or secure foreign aid. Protests have erupted again, with citizens demanding justice against the corrupt elites who bankrupted the nation. Without drastic intervention, Lebanon will likely see total state collapse in the near future. If that happens, it could trigger one of the biggest humanitarian disasters in the region. Number 2. Syria. Syria has been in crisis for over a decade, but in 2025, things are reaching a breaking point once again. The country is still reeling from civil war, economic collapse, and foreign sanctions, leaving millions of Syrians in dire conditions. The Syrian pound has plummeted to record lows, with inflation making it nearly impossible for citizens to afford basic goods. Food insecurity is at an all-time high, with the unwarning that over 70% of Syrians now rely on humanitarian aid to survive. The war may have slowed, but violence has never fully stopped. Terrorist groups, rebel factions, and foreign military forces continue to fight for control, making much of the country unlivable. Bombings, airstrikes, and kidnappings remain a daily threat. International sanctions have choked the economy, preventing Syria from rebuilding its infrastructure. Corrupt government officials continue to hoard wealth while ordinary Syrians live in extreme poverty. At this point, Syria is a completely failed state, and unless major diplomatic efforts are made, it could remain in collapse for generations. Number 1. Yemen. Yemen tops the list as the most fragile country in Asia, with a full-scale humanitarian crisis and economic disaster unfolding. After nearly a decade of war, the country is now on the brink of total collapse. The biggest issue: famine. The UN has reported that over 17 million Yemenis face extreme hunger, and without urgent aid, millions could die of starvation. The situation has only worsened as international funding dries up. The economy doesn't exist anymore. Yemen's currency is practically worthless, and the government has no money to pay public sector workers. Banks have collapsed, and black market trade is the only thing keeping the country afloat. War continues to devastate the nation. The ongoing conflict between the Saudi-backed government and Houthi rebels has made peace nearly impossible. Airstrikes, drone attacks, and battles rage on, leaving civilians trapped in a never-ending cycle of violence. With no functioning government, no stable economy, and one of the worst humanitarian crises in history, Yemen is not just on the verge of collapse, it's already there. Here are 5 practical tips to consider if you're in a country at risk of collapse. Stay informed on political and economic instability. Monitor local news, government policies, and financial markets to detect early warning signs of collapse. Have an exit strategy. If things deteriorate quickly, securing travel documents, emergency funds, and a backup destination can help you leave safely. Diversify your finances. Keeping savings in foreign banks, cryptocurrencies, or stable international assets can protect your wealth if the local economy crashes. Stock up on essential supplies. Food, water, medicine, and emergency gear can be life-saving in case of economic collapse, civil unrest, or supply chain disruptions. Build local and international connections. Having a strong network of friends, family, or expat communities can provide crucial support and resources during uncertain times. From economic meltdowns to full-scale war zones, these countries are facing some of the worst crises in modern history. If things don't change soon, some of them may never recover. But what do you think? Will any of these nations turn things around, or is collapse inevitable? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and explore our channel for more insights into global events. Thank you for watching.